What is going on, guys? The Not ATB Fantasy Show is back. I am Paul Ryan, and he is Dave PigskinPapers Hartman. Dave, how are you?
I'm doing well, Paul. It's been a minute, so I'm very happy to be doing this again. I can't remember the last time you and I did a show, but I miss it.
Absolutely.
There's a lot going on in sports in general. We had a nice run from the Knicks here in New York, which just ended, unfortunately. Aaron Rodgers signed today, and that's the last I think either one of us should say about that for this show. But lots going on. The Mets are doing well, so it's been a lot of fun recently in New York.
Hey, it's our first day back, and Aaron Rodgers decides to sign. There's got to be some correlation right there, Dave.
There's a sign, I think. Yeah, I mean, honestly, this whole thing was ridiculous. But anyway, I think it was inevitable. But now, for fantasy, it does help with someone like DK Metcalf and Pat Freiermuth and really the rest of that offense. But I think, people who've been drafting already, I think we're just kind of banking on it being Rodgers.
Yeah.
So like best ball drafts and things like that.
Just one last thing, and we'll end it here. But I'm kind of surprised that the Steelers even wanted Rodgers, to be honest. He doesn't look like he has anything left in the tank. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe they figure that pairing him with Tomlin, kind of a no-nonsense coach, a winning culture, a team that has a really good defense, maybe turns him back into a little bit more. The Jets are dysfunctional. And he missed the whole season there with the injury. He was playing well at the end of last season. I don't know. It'll be interesting. That's a very tough division. So we'll see.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, Dave, I know it's been a while since we talked after what we call a fantasy gap year. I'm excited to be back. I know I took some time off from creating fantasy content, but you actually kept grinding and landed a couple of new opportunities with SB Nation and Big Blue View. Dave, talk about your work there.
Yeah, sure. Well, as you know, SB Nation has team sites for pretty much every team in the four major sports in North America. And they're really good sites. They go very in depth. I mean, they vary in terms of their quality, but they go very in depth, and generally they're not just rah-rah, fan pages. They have real journalism, and they'll criticize their teams and just give wall-to-wall coverage, which, if you're a loyal fan of a team, those are great pages across all the sports, really. And I can't remember exactly how this happened, but Big Blue View, which is the New York Giants page on SB Nation, was looking for a writer, and they actually wanted someone to come in and add some content that they didn't have, which was fantasy football. I mean, they had plenty of people kind of covering the day-to-day goings-on with the Giants, and they have a really good writing team there. And they offered me the position to just be their fantasy writer and gambling, which is kind of funny because I don't bet a lot on sports, but I started so last season was my first season with them, and I did a bunch of off-season content, fantasy draft prep in the summer. And then during the season, I pretty much had 3 columns a week. I had a waiver wire column on Monday. I had a weekly fantasy preview, kind of I call it rides and fades, but it's basically a start sit kind of column that was on Thursdays. And then on Friday, I would do a betting column, taking that week's Giants game and picking like any 3 bets, prop bets, whatever. It was originally in partnership with FanDuel. It ended up just being a Big Blue View thing. And then I also did some writing for the main SB Nation site. Not sure if that's going to continue into this season. But on the Big Blue View site, and that's where you can find all my content, and I link it all on X, where I'm at PigskinPapers, X, former Twitter. But at Big Blue View, you can find all my fantasy content there, mixed in with all the Giants content. And periodically, I may write some Giants stuff, or Giants-centric fantasy stuff. Like last season, and I'll probably do this again this season, I wrote a preseason fantasy column just looking at the different Giants players. So I try to keep it topical. We've talked before that my family has Giants season tickets. So I do get to some of the games. We split them within the family, so everyone gets a piece of them, and we only have 2 tickets. But I usually get to at least 2 games a year, sometimes 3. So I have a pretty good beat on the team generally, and follow them. So it's been a good gig for me. So are you doing any of the Cowboys podcasting, or what kind of content might you be working on as we head towards this football season?
So, Dave, it's funny. I was prepping the sheet and I was like, man, I went an entire year without doing fantasy content. And then it dawned on me, it's like, I actually didn't take the year off from content. I was writing still with a site that no longer is creating content anymore. That was King Fantasy Sports, but I was still writing last year. It's just because of I had an uncertain schedule. So, I thought, I didn't really think that I could do that to you and, be so unpredictable week to week, but I was able to write last year. Of course, the Cowboys thing is still going on. We are in the off-season mode right now. We've been a pretty exciting off-season for the Cowboys, but yeah, we've been staying up to date on that. And we like to, in the off-season, we do a lot of guest-focused episodes. Now we're about to do what's called our Cowboys Beef, where we bring on fans who are the Cowboys and they just talk about the relationship with the Cowboys and how they feel about this upcoming season, how they felt about last year and things like that. So it's a good time if you're a Cowboys fan and you maybe are kind of tired of hearing about just everything that everybody else, every other content creator is talking about. I think it's a good change of pace for listeners looking to hear something about Cowboys, but maybe in a different way.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, Dave. Well, congratulations on those opportunities, man. That sounds really cool. I've always been a big fan of your work, and it's your hard work has definitely paid off, man.
I appreciate that. This is kind of a second act for me, as I'm retired, and then kind of went back to a first love, which is sports writing. So I'm glad that I'm getting an opportunity to do it. I'm working with really good people over there. They've been good to me. They've kind of given me a lot of freedom to sort of do the same thing I was doing on my PigskinPapers website, which I did that for a couple of years. I was just kind of doing this myself, putting out my own content on a site that I created. So this is good to have the support, to have an editor is helpful too, and he's really terrific. So it's fun, and I'm looking forward to writing for them through the summer and then through this coming football season again.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, Dave, like I said, it's been an active offseason. It sounds like, and not just for you, but for the NFL. Free agency, the draft have come and gone, and now OTAs are close to finishing week 3. Tonight, Dave and I are going to focus on our 3 favorite teams. Just to remind you guys, Dave is a longtime Dolphins fan, and I'm a lifelong Cowboys fan. And Dave is also a New York Giants season ticket holder, as you mentioned, for the NFL season. And I am the resident Cowboys fan, as I've mentioned. Of all the 3 teams, it seems that Miami was the least active this offseason, with their major move being more of a rumor and potentially trading away star receiver Tyreek Hill and star cornerback Jalen Ramsey. Dave, tell us, what were your 3 favorite moves by Miami this offseason?
As soon as they make one, I'll tell you. It's really been, I would say, a tough offseason for the Dolphins. When your biggest free agent acquisition is Zach Wilson, there's not a lot to get excited about there. And frankly, and maybe they looked at Wilson and said, you know what, he was a number 2 overall pick, and he's the kind of quarterback that could work in this system if Tua gets hurt again, which is, kind of quick reads, get the ball out quick, take off if nothing's there. And he has flashed a couple times in his career. He's mostly not been good. I think given the last couple years and what has happened every time Tua has gotten hurt,
right,
backup quarterback had to be a really big priority for the Dolphins. And I think only getting Zach Wilson, and I'm not quite sure who I would have rather seen them bring in, but I think was kind of a, like a C- maybe, or a C for them in terms of filling that need. And, they're continuing to lose good players. Like last year, it was Christian Wilkins. This year, Javon Holland, who went to the Giants. I didn't love their draft. I mean, I think I would have liked to have seen them get a defensive back with one of their earlier picks. I was fine with them taking a defensive tackle. They took Grant from Michigan, and then they took a guard who they traded up for early in the second. I'm not a talent evaluator. I hope those turn out to be good players who were values where they took them, but there was really nothing in their draft that made me jump up and down. They did take Quinn Ewers in the 7th round, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I actually thought they were going to take Shadur Sanders in the 5th. They had the pick right before Cleveland took him. I happened to be watching the TV coverage at that time, and I was just sure, I figured they wanted to get a quarterback in this draft, like just gamble on someone late, and seeing Sanders drop that far. But maybe they didn't want to bring in, someone who their family would immediately be saying, play him over Tua. So I don't know. But in any case, I didn't love any of their off-season moves. And like I said, they're probably going to trade Ramsey, as you had alluded to. They might trade Jonnu Smith, which we'll talk about, I think, a little bit later. I think Tyreek is there to stay, but it's been a really weird offseason for them. The vibes have not been good. I think their coach and their GM are both on the hot seat. And this could be the last season in Miami for both Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel if they don't, turn it around. I mean, in 3 years of McDaniel, they've made the playoffs twice and they have a winning record. But they haven't won a playoff game, and they kind of haven't improved. Like the things that they're not good at, like playing in the cold, like, having their offense churn against really good teams. They have not improved on those things, and their defense was probably peaked 2 years ago. And I'm really worried about it this season. So I'll just stop there and say I'm worried about this team headed into this season.
I got to say, Dave, Shadur Sanders in Miami, that would have been interesting.
Yeah. I think he'd be interesting anywhere just after all the drama. But
fair point, yeah. Definitely. Where do you rank Miami in the division?
I think the Patriots are probably going to finish ahead of them this year. I think Miami has a decent shot of finishing ahead of the Jets, who I just don't know. I never know what to think about that team. They have their, whatever it is, kind of their 4th quarterback in 4 seasons because of the season Rodgers got hurt and really didn't play. And I don't know what Justin Fields is gonna bring them, and how good they can be. They do have a good defense. But I think the Patriots have taken steps, and bringing in Mike Vrabel, just kind of, a real coach with real winning experience.
Yeah.
Who's kind of a Patriots legend. I could just see that team in Drake May's 2nd year. They also have the easiest schedule in the NFL. The Patriots are close to it. I saw a graphic on that the other day. So they're kind of a sexy pick to sneak in as maybe like the team that comes out of nowhere to be a wild card because they only won 3 games last year. But I could see them finishing ahead of the Dolphins.
Yeah, Miami's definitely an interesting team, especially for fantasy. Where do you rank Miami in the conference?
I mean, I think, there's some bad teams in the AFC South. I think other than Houston, Miami might be better than the other 3 teams in the AFC South. I'm not sure about Jacksonville. I think they're better than the Browns. I think they may be better than the Jets. They could be better than the Steelers. I'm a little worried about that team too. They're probably not. So I would put them, somewhere like 8th or 9th, maybe in the conference. Probably a little bit on the outside. I don't know about the Raiders this year. Their dial is pointing up to that whole AFC West. I think all those teams could be better than Miami this year. So I think they're probably, a team that if everything goes right for them, could they contend for a playoff spot? Absolutely. They've contended for a playoff spot each of the last 3 years and made the playoffs in 2 of those years. And the AFC is maybe not as strong as it was a couple seasons ago, but I think they're, on the outside looking in.
Yeah, you talk about the AFC South. I'm excited to see the Jaguars this year.
Yeah. The Travis Hunter is that's going to be fun to watch just to see how they use him.
Yes, sir. Do you prefer Waddle or Tyreek in fantasy this year?
So that's interesting. I'll answer this kind of thinking about them at ADP. Tyreek Hill right now, and ADPs, look, they're going to move a lot between now and August. So So I can only base this. I mean, we're talking about redraft, and they're both discounted. Like Tyreek right now has about a mid third round ADP, or even late third. I think his ADP is like around 31 or 32. And Waddle is like his ADP is around 61. So he's like at the 5-6 turn. I actually think they're both pretty good values. The risk is Tua getting hurt, but if Tua stays healthy, I think Miami's going to have one of the worst defensive backfields in the NFL, and especially with Ramsey likely leaving. It's a position, like I said, they needed to address in the draft, and they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And they really don't have a lot of depth there, and they lost some players this offseason. So I could see the Dolphins being a little bit like the Bengals were last year, like kind of that team that can score, and has weapons in the passing game, but maybe can't stop you and gets in a lot of shootouts. And if that's the case, I think both Waddle and Hill are really good values. Now, Tyreek really took a step back last year, and they were saying he was playing with a broken wrist, and Tua did miss 6 games, but Tyreek's numbers were like half of what they were the year before, at least in terms of yardage and touchdowns. He went from like 1,700 plus yards to 900 plus, and only scored 6 touchdowns after scoring like 12 or 13 the year before. But he's still Tyreek Hill, and he's going to be 31. So hopefully that wasn't the beginning of a decline and it was an aberration. I mean, I think he's worth the risk in the third. And I also like Waddle at the 5-6 turn. So my answer is at ADP, I'm kind of happy with either one of them.
Yeah. Just kind of going back to Tyreek Hill, I heard that he had 7 children last offseason, man. I mean, he was distracted, let's just say. How about that?
Yeah, he said, and then he had that whole thing with the Miami police and
the boat incident and everything.
He's had a couple of like accusations of domestic violence. Like I don't know. Like I said, the whole team, the vibe has been just not good this offseason for whatever reason.
It's unfortunate, man, because Miami's a fun team with good players.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the Jonnu Smith trade rumors, and should Miami pay or trade Jonnu, you think?
Well, I think if he doesn't come off his demand at all, then I think they might have to trade him. But I think they'll meet in the middle somewhere. I mean, I think they kind of called his bluff. He's an important cog in that offense. I mean, he really emerged in the second half of last season. He's a very athletic tight end who can create mismatches, and when a defense has to worry about a chain. By the way, I'm wearing a chain jersey.
Likes that jersey, sir.
Yeah. But when a defense has to worry about all that speed, Smith can be an afterthought, and he really did a lot of damage last year. He kind of became Tua's favorite target in the second half of the season, and I think he might have been the tight end 1 or tight end 2 in fantasy over the last 8 or 9 games. He was definitely right up there. So I hope they'll bring him back. I think he's a good fit in Miami, and the Pittsburgh rumors were kind of like Arthur Smith is there, and he had him in Atlanta and in Tennessee. So he's very familiar with him. And so I guess that's why that rumor was there, but they have Pat Freiermuth. I'm not sure they need another tight end. So hopefully he stays put, because like I said, I could just see the Dolphins in a lot of games that are just going up and down the field with a lot of scoring.
Yeah, I know, speaking for myself, of course, I think if Johnny were to get traded to Pittsburgh, man, he would probably be somebody I would be fading in fantasy football this year.
Yeah, I think so too.
Moving on here, as my computer has decided to slow down. If you could only draft one player from Miami in fantasy, who would it be?
I think it would be Devon Achane. And right now, his ADP is kind of like mid to late second round. And last year in the 11 games Tua played, he was actually the number 1 running back in fantasy. He had even more fantasy points across those 11 games than Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry, which may have been a function of those weren't their best games. But, he ended the season as like a top maybe 6 running back, 5 or 6 running back. They don't have a lot of competition for him. I mean, they drafted Jalen Wright last year. He did very little as a rookie. Raheem Mostert's gone. I'm sure they want Wright to do more this year, and a chain is only 185 pounds. So he did stand up to it last year. I mean, in his rookie year, he missed 6 games, but last year, I don't think he missed any games. And, they're a team that has scored a ton of rushing touchdowns the last couple of years. Tua doesn't get any of them. The running backs get them. And I think the risk is Tua getting hurt. I think, and a chain getting hurt, but that's the same risk, for the most part with any player, with any running back. But I think he's a great value where you're getting him. So he'd be the one. I mean, he's an every down back. He's a really good pass catcher. They use him a lot in the passing game, and he's got that breakaway speed. If your league gives points for, bonus points for long touchdowns, that's obviously a bonus too. So that would be my answer for him. So we've kind of covered the Dolphins. I've had a lot to say. I'm going to give you a chance now. We're going to talk about the Cowboys. So what were your, Dallas, you alluded to it before. People were making fun of Jerry Jones a lot last year. The whole thing with the nothing blocking the sunlight from CeeDee Lamb's eyes in the stadium, and bringing in Brian Schottenheimer as coach, and has the game passed him by? Last year, the all-in comments, and then they really didn't do that much in the offseason last year. But I from the outside looking in, not as a Cowboys fan, I thought they had a really good draft. I think they've had a good offseason, bringing in some players that can help. They'll get Prescott back healthy next year. So I think arrow up for them in a division where they're now looking up at 2 teams potentially ahead of them. But what were your favorite moves that they made this offseason, and what did you think of their offseason overall?
Offseason overall, very, very happy. I mean, I love what they've done with the coaching staff. My favorite move, I mean, it has to be the George Pickens trade, right? You pay a hefty price, a 3rd and a 5th, but to acquire a guy of his talent, who I know has had the, we have all heard the stories about him potentially being a problem or a diva or this and that. And then you kind of hear more stories about how he's not an issue in the locker room. The guy's he's a hard worker and he wants to win, and he's an emotional guy, and I'll take that all day. So the addition of George Pickens would be my favorite move. Then my second favorite move is the hiring of Clayton Adams, former running backs coach or offensive line coach from the Arizona Cardinals, now the offensive coordinator for the Cowboys. I like what he's going to do for our run game, and I think he's going to I think that's a move that was recognized when it happened, but maybe he's kind of going under the radar now. I think that he's going to be maybe known as one of the better up-and-coming offensive coordinators at the end of the season. And then my third move, I would say, I don't want to cheat and say their draft class, but you kind of alluded to it, they had a really good draft. Not so much sexy picks, but just solid guys, contributors, day one contributors, and at great values too. But the addition of Tyler Bookett to the offensive line, I think, is going to be talked about a lot this season. Yeah,
I Booker seems like one of those guys, and I know some people thought maybe they reached for him, but interior offensive linemen, the Dallas has such a good record of drafting them, and getting these guys like a Zach Martin or Travis Fredericks, these guys who they draft them and they're 10-year solid starters, or 8-year solid starters. Now on Pickens, just a one follow-up with him. So he's at the end of his rookie deal this year, right? So it's kind of a 1-year thing. And then if he does well, I guess Dallas will try to keep. They didn't extend him, right? So he's just playing on a 1 year, and then the last year of his rookie deal, and then whatever happens with him.
Yeah, from what I've heard from my guy, CD Piglet, co-host on the Across the Cowboys podcast, he's saying that Dallas does not want to pay 2 receivers $20 million. So I'm just hoping that, because George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb are apparently friends off the field, I'm hoping that Pickens has a good year, the Cowboys have a good year, and Pickens is having so much fun that maybe he takes a discount and he can kind of see all the endorsement opportunities that he can get being a Dallas Cowboy, and that could kind of maybe make up for taking a pay cut on the contract. We'll see what happens there. But it doesn't sound like, from what everybody I've heard, that the Cowboys plan to sign him to a new deal, but man, anything can happen.
Yeah, I mean Miami's paying 2 receivers more than 25 million each. And so are I think the Bengals are now too. And
Bengals too, yeah.
When that happens and you're paying, the quarterback the 50 to 55 million that both Miami and Cincinnati are paying, you see what it does to the rest of the team.
Yeah.
You can get by, but they both have running backs on rookie deals, so that's good. Chase Brown and Devon Achane. But then, you look across the rest of their team. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with Trey Hendrickson. Miami had to let Christian Wilkins go. And both teams have bad secondaries. So it's tough. I mean, you want to keep those two guys because it really gives you an advantage to have. I mean, I think CeeDee Lamb's just going to eat this year with Pickens on the other side running those fly patterns,
Definitely, yeah.
So and look, for Pickens, he's one thing in his defense is he's not played with good quarterbacks in Pittsburgh. Like it's been frustrating for him in part because they've been a run-first team with mediocre at best quarterback play for the whole time he's been there. Dak's going to be the best quarterback he's ever played with. So this is going to be interesting to see. And he's another guy like in fantasy. I don't know where to take him. Because it's like Debo in Washington. Like he hasn't been there before. There's a ton of talent, and you just don't know. He's the number 2 now. Instead of being the number 1, what's that going to look like? So that's something to watch, I think. So I'll ask you some of the same questions you asked me. Where do you rank Dallas in their division?
Can I cheat and say tied for first with Philadelphia and Washington?
You got all 3 of them at the same rate?
No, I think Philly is like the team to beat, obviously, but I don't think they're 3, and I don't think they're 1. So I'll say they're 2, but I think that Dallas really can. I do think that they can beat Philly. I think it's a long shot for that to happen, but I do think that they could win this division. I'll say second.
Okay. I hear that. I mean, Washington was a big surprise last year.
Exactly, yeah.
And Dallas was without its quarterback for a lot of the season. And that, Dallas did win 12 games 3 years in a row before last season. So it's not like they've been a bad team for a while. They had one bad season. So
right.
Well, now looking at the NFC more broadly, do you think they're a playoff team, and kind of where do you rank them in the conference? Are they in the top 7 that gets into the playoffs?
It's so funny because when you were, thinking about, you're talking about the AFC, I'm like, okay, just kind of going over my answer, and I'm like, it feels like it's Philly, the NFC North, and then it's everybody's got a shot. I don't feel like there's really
personally, I'd put the Rams in there too.
Yeah, the Rams, but I was just thinking the NFC West, and the Rams I think have a really good shot. I think they're the clear favorite in the NFC West. But so the Rams, the NFC North, and then Philly, and then anybody's got a shot, because the NFC South, I think it's the Buccaneers to lose, but I really like what the Panthers have done this offseason.
Yeah. And nobody should forget about the 49ers, honestly.
Of course not. Or the Falcons.
Yeah, but the 49ers, I mean, they went to the Super Bowl like 2 of the last 5 seasons. I mean, they had a year from hell last year with McCaffrey getting hurt right away, and then and Ayuk. They had last season was a mess for them, and Trent Williams was hurt for a while. So I think they're a team that people shouldn't sleep on too much. Now,
definitely.
One of the interesting position groups for Dallas is running back, which has really been kind of an issue since they had Zeke and Pollard, and then kind of had neither one of them. What do you think about their running back room? And for fantasy, who do you like there, like at ADP of their backs? Who are you most interested in?
As far as their running back room as a whole, I like their running back room just because I think all their players complement each other. Miles Sanders, Javonte Williams, Jaden Blue. I like all 3 of them. Again, the way they complement each other. As far as who is I would take, I'll take the old. I think it was like the Patriots and Saints theory, where it's like take the cheapest guy in drafts, and just kind of hope. But I've been targeting for a long time. I was targeting Miles Sanders just because he was kind of forgotten in drafts, and then I started to take a lot of Jaden Blue because he was like really, really forgotten. And then I started taking a combination of Javonte and Jaden Blue. So I know that doesn't really answer the question, but if I could only pick one, I think I might put my chips in on the rookie.
Okay, that's fair. And then let me ask you the question you asked me. If you could only draft one player on Dallas in fantasy, and I'll answer this too after you do, who would it be?
Man, it's got to be CeeDee Lamb. I want to say Dak Prescott, but it's CeeDee Lamb.
That's kind of my answer too. I want to say Dak because I think he's such a good value.
Yeah.
Like right now, he's the QB 14. So if you play in a 1 QB league, you can kind of get him for free. Probably around the 9th, 10th round, maybe. And that's, CD is going to cost you like the 5th or 6th pick in a draft, probably, or maybe 7th or 8th pick. But he's a
top
first
7 pick for sure.
So, it sort of depends on how I'm constructing my team, I guess. But I'm very high on CD this year. But again, everyone else is too. So he's not cheap.
He could be this year's triple crowner.
Could be. Yeah.
I don't think anybody would be surprised by that.
Nope.
Let's move on to the Giants here, Dave. What were your 3 favorite moves about the Giants this offseason? They've had a good offseason, I feel like.
They have had a good offseason. And I mean, it starts with, I guess, doing the smart thing and taking Abdul Carter with the 3rd pick. There were rumors a few weeks before the draft, which may have been spread by the Sanders family. I don't know. But that, they were really interested in Shedeur. Then it kind of came out that they didn't like him in his interview, and he kind of like interviewed them and wasn't really prepared for the kind of questions Daboll was asking him. That this is all rumors. So I don't know. But, sitting there with the 3rd pick and knowing Tennessee was going to take Cam Ward, the smart thing for them to do, I don't think, was to trade down, even though they need a lot of stuff. I think it was to take one of the 2 best players in the draft, whichever one fell to them between Carter and Hunter. And, I think the addition of Carter, when you already have Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau and Dexter Lawrence in the middle, I mean, you lean into a strength. You're a team that doesn't have a lot of strengths, right? You're not good at that many things. You've been one of the worst teams in the NFL for the last couple years. If you can be really good at one thing, and that one thing is rushing the passer, then your secondary doesn't need to be that good, right? Because they don't have to cover for as long. You get some turnovers, sacks and drives. You can stay in some games. So I think they were smart to do that. And look, Carter, you never know with players, but he seemed like one of the kind of highest floor players in this class. So that would be the first one. And it was kind of a no-brainer, but I'm glad they did it. And, I'm not going to put getting Jackson Dart as one of my 3, but I like that they got him without giving up too much. Like they have their 1st round pick next year. They didn't have to give up a future first. They took him late in round 1, so it didn't cost them that much to move up. So it's not like one of these things where like if he fails, they fail. Because they didn't put all their eggs in one basket to go up and get him, like we've seen with like Trey Lance, with the Niners or something like that. So the second one I'll say was getting cornerback Paulson Adebo from the Saints. He's a kind of a rangy corner. He's like 6'1", 200. Had a good season with the Saints last year. I think he's, kind of a good young player to add to a secondary that needed some help. And they brought in Javon Holland. I know he had an off season with Miami last year, but he was terrific.
Player, man.
He was terrific as a rookie and as a second-year player, and then has kind of fallen off a little bit. But I think some of that might have been coaching and scheme. Miami's had a bunch of different defensive coordinators in the last couple of years, and I think Holland will be a good player for the Giants. So I think they've had a good offseason. I mean, the weird thing about the Giants is the position they're in, which is, if their coach and if they don't win this year and if they don't improve a lot, and it's going to be hard for them because they have the hardest schedule, the hardest schedule in the NFL for a team that won 3 games and, had the 3rd pick in the draft. They have the single hardest schedule in the NFL. And what that means is it's going to be hard for them to win 7 or 8 games, which might save the jobs of Daboll and Joe Shane. And, they took a rookie quarterback, so they kind of want to see what he does. But at the same time, they're coaching for their jobs. So I'm very curious to see how that dynamic plays out. But in any case, I would put that as those three moves would be the ones I like the most.
That defensive line is scary as a Cowboys fan.
Yeah, it is. And like I said, like if that's their identity,
yeah.
No, and look, this is not the 2007 or 2011 Giants, but those teams won 2 Super Bowls against the Patriots largely because they didn't have to blitz Tom Brady. They had that defensive front with Strahan and Tuck and the rest of those guys that could get pressure on Brady and collapse the pocket from the middle and make him uncomfortable and still have 7 guys covering their receivers. And that was their identity then. And if they want to lean back into that identity, I'm fine with it. Fans like that. Fans like a team that can get after the quarterback. And I'm excited to go to games and see Abdul Carter and Brian Burns and the rest of them.
Yeah, and then on the offensive side of the ball, you've got some exciting players in Malik Neighbors and Cam Scatteraboo, and you don't know what you have in Jackson Dart, but at least you've got somebody to be excited about.
Yeah.
So where do you rank the Giants in the division? I mean, I hate to say last, but it sounds kind of like, when you look at the other teams in the division.
I think looking at that division, it's going to be really hard for them. I mean, if Jaden Daniels, and I'm not wishing injury on anyone, but I think the only way the Giants don't finish last in that division, barring just some sort of miracle with the way the team plays, is if like Prescott gets hurt again, or Jaden Daniels gets hurt, or Barkley and Jalen Hurts get hurt. I just think at full strength, they've got the worst roster in that division. It's a tough division. I mean, you got the defending Super Bowl champs, you got the team that they beat in the NFC Conference Championship game in the Commanders. And like I said, Dallas won 12 games 3 years in a row before last season and still has a dangerous, roster with stars on it, like Lamb and Prescott and Micah Parsons and the rest, and a solid offensive line. So, I just hope they're competitive, because one of the things that was really frustrating last year watching the Giants was how many games they got blown out in. They had games where they were down by 30. At least one of the Cowboy games was like that. So, I think what you want to see if you're a Giant fan, and certainly if you're the ownership group of the team, to see that they're moving in the right direction, is a team that's competitive and that can score in the first half. One of the things, and I think this was a knock on Brian Daboll last year, like they didn't look ready to play in the first half of games. They had a whole bunch of games last year where they got shut out in the first half and like didn't cross the 50 and only had a couple of first downs. And Malik Neighbors had like 2 targets in the first half. And then they would go in at halftime. And, look, when you're playing from behind, it's a little easier, to move the ball and to put up some stats, because the other team, is just trying to avoid the big play and playing a little more conservatively on defense. And then Neighbors would get like 8 targets in the second half and end up with a good stat line, and they'd score some points. So I think if you're a Giant fan, or like I said, the ownership group, you just want to see them be more competitive and more ready to play and have more of a hope for the future, which is where Jackson Dart, not the first quarterback they've taken from Ole Miss, right? To see where, that's where he might come in. We'll see.
Yeah, just competitive football. You always see that. You can always feel encouraged about that. Even if you don't win, it's nice to see a team that's actually out there trying, and that one that cares. Yeah,
especially when you're paying for season tickets.
Yeah. Real quick, before I move on to this next question here, Dave. How much of that do you blame on Daniel Jones, the offense last year?
I think the worst – it's kind of funny. Like the worst thing that happened to the Giants was the 2022 season, where Daniel Jones stayed healthy, had the best year of his career, got them into the playoffs, and won a playoff game on the road. That kind of like – he got a contract out of that, and then the team for 2 years, he got hurt a couple times. He's not the same player since injury, since the neck injury. He's a good athletic quarterback, but I can't blame him for what happened last year, and he was only there for half the season, and then they traded him. But it didn't help, kind of having a little bit of a sort of dead man walking. You knew they were going to move away from the contract at some point. It was a distraction while he was on the team, just kind of, the fans were piling on him. But I kind of blame the coaching staff more than anyone for kind of how things have gone the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, just because I remember, after he got benched, how the players are coming out and saying that he wasn't the problem. I thought that was, I wasn't sure if that was, the players are sticking up for their quarterback or if there was some truth to that,
Yeah, I mean, he was a problem because like
Yeah.
I said, they had a lot of games last year where they didn't score. I mean, I went to the first game of the season, which was against the Vikings. Now, no one knew how good the Vikings were going to be. Like, no one knew that was a 14-win team. I think the Giants might have been favored in the game, actually, by like a point or something. It's opening week, so no one knows really what's going to happen, and no one knew. I mean, Sam Darnold, I think people were kind of like laughing, like, "Oh, you're starting that guy," And the Giants didn't score in the first half of their first game of the year, and the Vikings were up or maybe they kicked a field goal, but the Vikings were up like 2 touchdowns at the half, and it was like, whoa, like, why can't we move the ball? And like, why is our offense so predictable? They were like kind of running into the line on 1st and 2nd down and then trying to throw against a team with, Daniil Hunter on one side and, like a good pass rush and a Brian Flores defense, and they got smoked in that game. Now, it turned out they should have lost to the Vikings. The Vikings were a really good team last year, but there were just a lot of games like that. And so you got to blame some of that on Daniel Jones because he wasn't making plays and he wasn't moving the offense. But the problems ran deep, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. For fantasy purposes, who are you hoping starts more games, Russell Wilson or Jackson Dart?
Jameis Winston. I mean, purely for fantasy purposes, give me Jameis, right? Like,
yeah, for sure.
If Jameis Winston started the whole season, I think Malik Neighbors would have 1,600 yards and 15 touchdowns and probably 140 catches if he could stay healthy. Not 140, but maybe 120. I think with Jackson Dart, you just don't know. I mean, rookie quarterbacks, last year aside, because last year was really unusual with like the 4 of them and then even Michael Penix at the end of the season. He didn't play enough to know, but the 4 who started, Caleb Williams was a little iffy, but the other ones were all so good, at least at times. But I think in general, it's hard to count on a rookie quarterback to like lift the receivers. And Russell Wilson at this point, you kind of know what you're getting. It's nothing great. But he's had flashes the last couple of years where he's, especially when his team is behind, where he's put up some numbers. So I guess I would say, given the choices you gave me, Russell Wilson.
Yeah, I think so. Especially, maybe to start off the season, I would agree with you there. Do you think Dart has any fantasy value this year in redraft leagues?
I don't think so. I mean, first of all, I don't think you need to draft him. I mean, if you think he does, he's not going to get drafted. I don't think in most, redraft leagues that have like 6 bench spots. There's so many quarterbacks, and he's not an opening day starter. So, I think it's the kind of thing where once there's a rumor that the Giants are going to make the switch, and at some point this season, you have to think they're going to let Dart play, and especially if the season gets away from them, and given their schedule, it might. At the same time, you don't want to throw Dart out there like his first game against like the Eagles or, the Giants it's the whole NFC East. The NFC East plays the NFC North and the AFC West. So
yeah,
that's just 8 good teams. And I'm allowing myself to say that the Raiders and the Bears both have their arrow up and are not going to be easy teams, for anyone to play.
Right.
And then the Giants, their reward for coming in last in the NFC East is their NFC West team that they play is the 49ers because they came in last, right? So that's no bargain. I mean, I'd rather play the Seahawks or the Cardinals,
for
like
sure.
the Cowboys and Commanders are playing. So, the Giants right now are only favored in 1 game this year, and last year they were only favored in I think one game. And they're favored when they play the Saints. And that's looking at the betting lines now. This can obviously and will change. But their schedule is brutal. And so even when Dart plays, he's going to be playing against a lot of good teams that are going to tee off on a rookie and confuse him. And so I don't think he has a lot of value this year. I mean, I think in Dynasty, it's a different story. But I think, I don't think you're going to get a lot out of him. He can run, which is nice, but I don't think so.
Similar to the Cowboys, the Giants have two good running backs, and rookie Cam Scatterboo, and then Tyron Tracy, who really came on last year and kind of took the job from Devin Singletary. Is this a either or situation in fantasy, or can both be fantasy viable?
They also have Devin Singletary, who Daboll, kind of loves from his time in Buffalo.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to play too. So, this is one of those things where, like you said before, like maybe draft who's cheapest, although I think that'll be Singletary. I think people will overdraft Scatterboo a little bit. He's just like a cult figure, like the tape of him in college is just so fun to watch. Like he's just bouncing off guys and like, he's like the Pete Rose of college football. He just his legs never stop moving, and he's a fun player.
Yeah.
So I think people are going to like kind of draft him and then maybe be a little disappointed when he's just not getting that much run on an offense that's not that good and doesn't get that many goal line carries. I think Tracy's probably the guy who will lead the team, assuming everyone stays healthy, lead the team in carries and fantasy points, but it's probably a backfield to mostly avoid. You take like late flyers on some of them, but I wouldn't invest a lot of draft capital. What do you think? You gotta what have you been doing in best ball? I know you do a lot of best ball drafts. So have you been fading the Giants backfield or taking some swings?
Prior to the draft, I kind of was avoiding the Giants backfield only for the simple fact that I'm like, I think the Giants are going to add a guy, so I didn't know how safe Tracy's job would be. And then once Scatterboo landed with the Giants, I was like, okay, well, now I'll take some Tracy because he's even cheaper now. And then I'll mix in some Scatterboo as well. I've heard everything I've heard from like best ball guys who are well respected in the fantasy community, and also, who have earned their stripes and have, made some real money. They all really like Scatterboo. So I've, taken their words with a grain of salt. I've definitely wanted to mix in some Scatterboo because, there's a term that's saying you don't want to let him beat you. And it's like, you don't want to pass on guys just because you don't like them. And then come to find out they have league winning seasons.
Yep. No, that's fair. Sticking with fantasy questions. And I think kind of for the rest of the show, we're gonna mostly lean into fantasy because we've talked a lot of kind of straight NFL. And for those who are new to the show, I mean, I think one of the things that I really enjoy about doing the show with Paul, and I think that maybe makes us a little different than a lot of the other podcasts that are out there, is we tend to spend about half our time talking fantasy and about half our time talking about actual football that we watch on Sundays. The actual NFL. And I really like that because my writing is almost all fantasy, but I really do kind of prefer talking about the league itself. And I'm an NFL fan for 50 plus years and really enjoy just following the league and trying to understand which teams are doing what for what reason and who's good and who isn't good. So I really enjoy talking about that, but we're going to focus on something I also love talking about, and Paul does too, which is fantasy for the rest of this show. So Paul, based strictly on ADP, who's your favorite player to target in the rough and tumble NFC East? And I'll answer you after you go.
It's so difficult because I've literally been drafting since around the Super Bowl, whether it be like best ball or things like that. It's been for months, and I found myself taking a lot of Dak Prescott because his value was so low. I found myself taking a lot of Jake Ferguson because his value was so low, and then mixing in some Giants players and then trying to take the upside in Jaden Daniels and what have you. But recently, I'll say at ADP, my favorite player to take right now, I really like George Pickens. I know that the Cowboys landing spot is kind of caused him to rise up draft boards, and rightfully so. But I still think that he's at such a reasonable price that when you look at the guys in his range, I don't think that they have the upside that he does.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, my answer, and again, I'm thinking just about redraft and 1 QB leagues, because that's the ADPs that I have.
Right. Yeah.
For me, it's if I decide at the outset of a draft that I want one of the 4 kind of elite dual threat quarterbacks, I want to get, because I think there's a real, and I'm not putting Joe Burrow in the top tier because he's a pocket passer, and as great as he was last year, he doesn't do that every year.
Yeah.
Whereas I think that if you look at Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, especially with the tush push still on the rule book, and Jaden Daniels, those guys are kind of, if they stay healthy with the amount they run, it's really hard for them not to finish, in the top 5 or 6 QBs. Josh has been doing it every year. Lamar has been doing it almost every year. Hurts has done it every year since he became the starter. And Daniels did it his first year, and I see no reason he won't again. So if I make a decision that I want one of those 4 guys, then Jaden Daniels, because he's like, his ADP right now is 37. So that's like at the 3-4 turn, whereas Lamar and Josh Allen are more than a full round ahead of that. They're like mid-second, I think. Or like maybe 10, 11 picks ahead. So that would be my answer. If I decide not to do that and just take a quarterback, and then I'll say what I said earlier in the show. I love Dak Prescott in like the 9th, 10th, 11th round as like the 14th or 15th QB off the board. I mean, that's such a ridiculously cheap price for a guy that a couple years ago was on his way to an MVP season, almost had an MVP season, and easily throw for 35. I mean, he doesn't run as much anymore. I get that. But they're a team that probably won't run the ball all that efficiently. Maybe they'll be a little better with that, but I still think they're a throw first, maybe not throw first, but throw for yards and touchdowns kind of team. And he's got good weapons, and especially with the addition of Pickens. And Brandon Aubrey. If I'm taking my kicker,
there you go.
I'll take a kicker before the last round to grab Aubrey, as long as it's, I'm not taking him in the 12th round like some people do, but he's another one.
Just, going back to Dak, especially in the McCarthy era, but Dallas was notorious for throwing in the red zone, even when they had Zeke or Pollard. Even with Dak and his rushing ability, they love to throw in the red zone. So, yeah, man, Dak he's due for a big season. I won't be surprised if he's at least a top 7 quarterback this year.
Yeah, he has that upside for sure. Okay, next question, Paul. Next fantasy question. Who's your favorite rookie to target in the NFC East?
Man, this one was tough because, we talked a lot about Scatterboo. We talked a lot about, we didn't talk a lot about it, but I really have been targeting a lot of Jaden Blue where I can get him, but his price has risen so much. I'll stick with Jaden Blue, man. I mean, his price is pretty high, but I think the potential, the reward is much higher than the risk. So I'm going to go with Jaden Blue.
Yeah. I mean, this division just doesn't have a lot of fantasy relevant rookies this year.
Right.
It just doesn't. So I'll give the same answer. I mean, I think Jaden Blue, just because the running back situation in Dallas is kind of unsettled, and maybe by he's one of those guys that maybe roster him and just wait and kind of hold. Don't drop him when he's not getting a lot of run early, and hope that, Javonte Williams, the chances of him holding up for a whole season. Same with Miles Sanders. They've both had a lot of injuries in their careers. I'm sure Dallas wants to see what they have in Jaden Blue. So I could see him being a guy that you stash and just kind of sit on, and maybe in the second half of the season, he's like Tajay Spears was 2 years ago for the Titans, and just gets passing down work and a little bit of the other work, and breaks some long runs and stuff like that. So I answer.
Agreed. Well, Dave, here we are. We're going to do a fun exercise here. We've talked about the Dolphins, the Giants, and the Cowboys. So we're going to build a team of 5 players, a quarterback, a running back, a wide receiver, a tight end, and a flex, but with a twist. One is we cannot take the same player. And 2, we're going to do like a, if you want to go vice versa, I guess, if you want to call it, where the person who drafts who goes first drafting quarterback, then the person the person who went second drafting quarterback gets to go first drafting running back, and so on and so on. So I think that makes things a little bit interesting. I'm curious to see how these teams end up.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we are only picking Cowboys,
Yes,
Dolphins,
yes,
and Giants. So you've got like 2 teams that have a bunch of fantasy assets and 1 team that has Malik Neighbors. So
right,
a lot of other desirable fantasy assets, to be honest. Like,
exactly,
on a fantasy team this year, at least to start the season, Malik Neighbors might be the only Giant in forget Superflex. In like 1 quarterback leagues, Malik Neighbors might be the only Giant that's starting for anybody in week 1 in fantasy. That's possible. So This should be an interesting exercise. All right. So why don't you, I guess I go first, right? Quarterback.
No, I'll let you decide. Do you want to go first or do you want to go second on quarterback?
I'll go first because it's going to give me 3 first picks, even though it's going to give you the first pick at running back, where there's the biggest delta between player number 1 and player number 2. So I will take. So my choices here are Dak or Tua, or one of the Giants, which I can't consider. I will take the guy I've been talking about all episode, Dak Prescott. And that gives me, I think it gives me an advantage over you to start with. Who's your quarterback?
It shouldn't be this hard of a decision, but I'm almost tempted to say Russell Wilson, but I got to go Tua, man, with Waddle and with Tyreek Hill. I mean, he'd be silly not to take Russell Wilson over Tua Tagovailoa. At running back, I think it's pretty simple. Achane is the easy pick here. What about you, Dave?
Yeah, this is tough because we've been talking about these teams, and neither the Giants nor the Cowboys have, a clear number 1 running back or anyone that's likely to score tons of fantasy points. I'll take Tyrone Tracy. I think I'll give him. I just think Dallas is a little. Like I'm pretty sure that on opening day, first carry of the season is going to Tracy, and he's going to have the first chance to kind of be the lead back for that team. The concern I have is the offense he's in, and like just how many touchdowns are they going to score versus Dallas. But I don't want to take Javonte Williams just because I don't have a lot of faith in him holding the job and staying healthy. So. Okay, we'll move to receiver now, and this is a good one because there's a couple guys, and then whoever doesn't get taken here with our first 2 picks is eligible for the flex spot, which I don't see any running backs or tight ends being considered flex spots. So between the 2 of us, we're going to be taking 4 receivers. So I get the first crack, and I think it's pretty easy. I'll take CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, I mean, I figured you'd take that, but I thought maybe you'd throw a curveball in there and say Malik Neighbors, so I'll take Malik Neighbors.
All right, that's fair. Honestly, I didn't want the second pick here because I don't know who I would have taken between Malik and Tyreek Hill, although I had decided that if I went second, I would take Tyreek. So,
Tyreek was in consideration for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so now we move on to tight end, and you go first.
I'll take someone who I feel is undervalued, and Jake Ferguson. I think, he had the off year last year with the concussion, not ever coming back right and things like that. But he's severely undervalued. We've seen what he could do. I mean, 2023, like he looked like he was on ascending to a top 5 tight end. So I'm going to bank on that kind of upside in Jake Ferguson.
All right, that makes my pick pretty easy. I'll take Jonnu Smith, and if he gets traded out of the division, then I don't have a tight end, right? So then I have to take like Daniel Bellinger or somebody. But no, I'll take Jonnu Smith. I think he will be back with the team. I think he will not put up numbers like he did the second half of last season, but he'll have some spike weeks, which is kind of, tight end after like the first couple guys, I think is a bit of a crapshoot this year. If you don't get if you don't get McBride or Bowers or Kittle, then I think there's a pretty big drop off. So
Right.
I'm happy taking Jonnu there. So I get to go first at flex, and
Hard choice here, man.
hard choice here. I mean, so let me see how Dolphin dependent I am so far. I've got Dak, I've got Tyrone Tracy, I've got CeeDee Lamb, I've got Jonnu Smith. So I only have one Dolphin. I'll take Tyreek Hill. I mean, how can I not? You know, he was 2 years ago, he was the number one wide receiver in fantasy. And then last year he dropped a lot. But he's Tyreek Hill. It's him or Pickens here, I think. Am I missing someone? I guess Waddle. Those are kind of the three in contention. And I know who you're going to take. So I'll take Tyreek. Go ahead. Say it.
You know, I wasn't sure if you were going to take Tyreek. I'm sitting here going, do I want to take Tyreek Hill? Do I want to take Jalen Waddle? Or I feel like George Pickens is someone, again, who's still undervalued. And I think there's a lot less questions about what Dallas's offense will be compared to Miami. So I'll go crazy. I'm going to say George Pickens.
Yeah, I mean, if I took Pickens, the issue is I'm thinking a little bit team construction here too. First of all, I'll take Tyreek over Pickens, just period. But
for sure,
having the Dak, CD, and Pickens stack is great until like Dak gets hurt or something, and then I have nobody, and then I have three spots that are a problem. So I don't like to stack that heavily anyway. But I'm happy taking Tyreek. So I think we both have some good teams. You know, maybe we should like put a pin in this, and then at the end of the season, just total up the fantasy points of each.
Let's do that. That'll be fun.
Guys. So
yeah,
I'll write down the teams and I'll put that away somewhere. Plus, we have the recording if we ever need to go back and check the videotape.
For sure.
That was a fun exercise. Let's maybe in future episodes we'll do some similar team fantasy drafts like that because I think that was fun. Definitely,
yeah. I like doing that for sure.
Only one Giant got taken. No, two. Tyrone Tracy and Malik Neighbors.
I almost thought about taking Theo Johnson.
Well, you never know.
Yeah, you never know. Dynasty guy for sure.
Or Wan'Dale Robinson, in a PPR. He a lot of targets last year.
Yes, sir. He's one of my best ball targets for sure.
Late rounds of Scott Fishbowl with the point per target. We'll talk about Scott Fishbowl on a future episode too, because I know we're both very excited to be in that again. But we'll talk about that another time.
One of the funnest fantasy leagues you can ever be in, if not the funnest.
And for a good cause, which is actually everyone says that, but it's actually really true.
Truly
is. To see something that big for Toys for Kids charity. It's great what they do over there. So.
Absolutely. Well, Dave, here we are towards the end of the episode, and we always like to end it with a bold call. Here we are with our favorite team edition. Dave, give us a bold call for Miami Dolphins.
Okay, I'm going to give you we're back to my betting column. I'm going to give you a 4-leg parlay.
Okay.
And that is that each of these 4 people will be fired at the end of the season.
Oh, wow.
Giants GM Joe Shane, Giants coach Brian Daboll, Dolphins GM Chris Greer, Dolphins coach Mike McDaniel. So I'm giving you something across 2 teams. And while all of those things might seem a little bit likely, getting all 4 of those together, and all 4 have to happen for my bold call to be right. Any 4-to-1 parlay is hard to hit. So, or 4-leg parlay. So that's my bold call. The season, neither of those teams, things don't go right enough for the coaches and GMs to save their job, and it's turn the page for both teams. Yeah. What is your bold call from the down? And I covered both of my teams, so you only have to cover one team. What's your bold call for the Dallas Cowboys?
So, Dave, I've been saying this for a couple of weeks now, but my bold call is, with the addition of George Pickens, the Dallas Cowboys will have the number 1 offense in the NFL.
I like that. They had the number 1 offense 2 years ago, or maybe they had the highest scoring team, or 3 years ago?
I think it was the highest scoring team.
Yeah. I like it. I mean, it's not impossible. And then you throw in the points they get when Aubrey hits those like 65-yard field goals as the half expires.
Right.
A few extra points from that. I like it. Well,
Yes,
Paul,
sir.
this was really fun. I was very happy to be back on the air again, and we'll try to get on some kind of schedule through the summer and into the season, because I've missed this. I know you have.
Definitely, yeah.
It was fun talking football and talking fantasy tonight.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm glad that there was no it didn't feel like we had to work on getting back with our chemistry, if you will.
Exactly, and we actually stayed to an hour, which we almost never do. So
Yes, sir.
the show sheet, which I thank you for creating the show sheet this week, was a good length.
Always, yes.
Even
Yes,
with
sir.
how wordy, even with how much I talk, we finished in an hour. So so we're good.
Yes, sir. Well, Dave, before we get you out of here, remind you where we can find you on Twitter, sir.
Yep, you can find me on Twitter, X, at PigskinPapers. You can find my columns there, and also, well, I link all my columns there, and also at bigblueview.com. My last couple columns were the riskiest players in fantasy, which kind of from an ADP lens, and the safest players in fantasy. And no one will be surprised that I have Christian McCaffrey as my single riskiest, all or nothing, widest range of outcomes player for this year. Just look at what he did each of the last 2 seasons. But those are my last 2 columns. Check them out at bigblueview.com. Paul, where can people find you?
Guys, you can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15. You can find the Dallas Cowboys podcast across the Cowboys every Monday night on Twitter and here on YouTube. We appreciate you joining us, and we will see you guys soon.